Good morning, seventh graders. Welcome to the read aloud of the article The Hurricane of 1900. So, the directions. Read this story/passage and answer the questions that follow. In September 1900, a powerful hurricane swept across the Gulf of Mexico and devastated the town of Galveston, Texas. It is recorded as the deadliest hurricane in U.S. history. The Hurricane of 1900. On Friday, September 7th, 1900, the people of Galveston, Texas, were getting ready for Labor Day weekend. 2 days later, almost every building in the town had been either damaged or completely destroyed. In 1900, Galveston was an important cotton market. Cotton grown in Texas was shipped from Galveston all over the world. The city sits on the end of an island between Galveston Bay and the Gulf of Mexico. The island was about 30 miles long and from 1 to 3 miles wide. The first hint of a storm appeared on Friday evening. Winds blowing at about 15 miles per hour started to rattle windows. By midnight, the winds had strengthened. However, the people were still not aware that a major hurricane was bearing down on their city. Storm tracking equipment did not exist at that time. Instead, ships at sea would radio the position and the track of storms. Unfortunately, many residents spent Saturday watching the heavy surf crashing onto the beach, when they should have been making preparations to leave the island. By noon, the winds were gusting to over 50 miles per hour. Around noontime, a ship tore loose from its moorings and destroyed the three bridges connecting Galveston to the mainland. With the major force of the hurricane only hours away, the 38,000 people in Galveston were cut off from safety. No one seemed concerned, however. In their experience, the people of Galveston had survived other storms. As evening approached, the winds became stronger. People started to realize that this was an unusually strong storm. The wind started to blow even harder, eventually reaching over 145 miles per hour. The rain fell so hard that it became impossible to see anything at all. By late Saturday, waters from the Gulf of Mexico had covered over most of the island. Water flowed into homes all over the island. People were forced into their second and third stories to escape the water. Buildings all over the city started to collapse because of the surging water. The strong wind blew large pieces of wood all around. Many of the people running to higher ground were killed or maimed by this flying debris. By midnight, the water level was 20 feet above normal. The entire island was now underwater. By the early hours of Sunday, the storm had abated, and the water had begun to recede from parts of the island. Even then, many of the residents were still forced to hold on to stationary objects to keep from drowning. When daylight finally arrived in Galveston, people looked out onto the worst devastation they had ever seen. One-third of the city had been obliterated. The buildings that were left had been badly damaged, and many of those still standing had to be torn down. The survivors stumbled around in a state of shock. Whole families had disappeared. In most families, at least one or more members were missing. Most sources agree that about 6,000 people died in Galveston, and another 2,000 died along the Texas shore from this storm. Damage was estimated at $30 million in $1,900. The residents of Galveston started rebuilding as the storm had passed. For safety reasons, they had two major changes to the city. The first was to build a 17-foot-high, 3-mile-wide seawall. The second was to increase the town's elevation to 7 feet above sea level by dredging sand from the Gulf of Mexico. Survivors set up temporary shelters in surplus U.S. Army tents along the shore. There were so many of them that observers began referring to the scene as the White City on the beach. Others constructed so-called storm lumber homes, using salvageable material from the debris to build shelters. By September 12th, mail was received at Galveston for the first time since the storm. The next day, basic water service was restored, and Western Union began providing minimal telegraph services. Within 3 weeks, cotton was again being shipped out of the port. Prior to the hurricane of 1900, Galveston had been considered a beautiful, prestigious city. It was known as the Ellis Island of the West and the Wall Street of the Southwest. However, after the storm, development shifted north to Houston, which had already begun to grow more prosperous. Today, Galveston is a thriving port on the Gulf of Mexico. The safety improvements have worked. Hurricanes since 1900 have not caused nearly the loss of life and damage that the hurricane of 1900 did.